Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Stefan Thoma, and I will be presenting about cross-industry package development. And particularly, I want to present about my personal perspective, which is the perspective of a newcomer. I've been at Roche since November as an intern for about 5 months, and then joined the permanent role as a statistical programmer, which is now called an analytical data scientist, since about April. So what is the greater context of this? In my opinion, one huge thing that has happened, and we've heard it a couple of times already today, is the shift to open source solutions and maybe a bit more language agnostic solutions in the pharma industry. And particularly, we have a huge shift towards R, which I'm personally very excited about. But not necessarily independent of this, but certainly not necessarily. What also has happened is a shift towards cross-industry collaborations. And that's, of course, facilitated by open source solutions, but it's not a requirement, and it doesn't naturally follow from that. But it's like a separate thing that's also really exciting for me. But that also means we are now working on new platforms. We work with new programming languages. We need new solutions also. And that's where the Pharmaverse comes in. And the Pharmaverse is, you've heard it before, and probably most of you have heard of it already. It's opinionated collections of packages designed for clinical reporting. And it has been designed from the beginning, from the start, using cross-industry collaborations. And today I want to talk about one specific project, which is under the Pharmaverse. It's called Admiral, and it's a part of that clinical reporting solution under Pharmaverse, and it specifically covers one small sliver of that, which is the creation of ADAM data. And ADAM data, for people outside of pharma, is a specific data format. It's a CDISC standard data format, and it's required for submissions also, and for data analysis as well. Let me see what I want to say here else. Yeah, I think that's it for Adam. So today I want to talk about Admiral, which is a part of my work that I've been doing at Roche. I've been assigned 20% of my time I can assign to this project, and I feel very excited about. And today I want to tell you what thoughts went into this project, how it got started a little bit, and why I'm excited about it, and why I think you should too. So first I want to talk a bit about the approach. And I think in general, when you work in the open source space, it's important to act quickly. And act quickly, I don't mean act quick and break things, or whatever that was, right? I want to encourage you to talk about what you're doing very early on, and open source very early on. Because if you don't do that, maybe another company comes first, goes open source, and you've spent maybe 6 months already, or a year in-house building the exact same thing, and you still have duplicated efforts. And what I think is really important, and what was happened with Admiral as well, is that it was communicated from the very beginning. It was, I think, not even anticipated as a cross-industry collaboration, but Thomas Neitzmann posted, I think, on LinkedIn that what they tried to do, and then Michael Rimler chimed in. He's from GSK. Thomas Neitzmann used to be at Roche. And they chimed in, and they realized they tried to solve the exact same problem. They want to have this sort of solution in R implemented, and now they can talk together. They realized they try to do the same thing, so why not do it together? And what they did was they sat together, they had a lot of meetings, and they realized we have to create first a prototype, but first we reach out to all other companies that could be interested in this and tell them what we are up to, and ask them if they would be willing to get on board, or would be willing to test once we have a running prototype. So they reached out to about, I think, 20 companies, or in the end 20 companies took part in this project, with about 50 programmers who all, after this 6 months period when they started to build the prototype, afterwards about 50 programmers from 20 different companies reviewed and tried out and tested the code and provided a lot of comments for improvements for Admiral. And that way you got directly the opportunity to work on a solution that impacts the whole industry. You have directly feedback from all the community, from a lot of users, and you can develop much more serious solutions, much more general use solutions, and you don't sit in your own company and you don't build your own siloed solution that maybe does not work for anyone else. And that's also my point about open sourcing early. So if you build a product for your own company, and after 2 or 3 years you decide, let's open source it, you have to go through a lot of the code. You have to put in a lot of effort to actually make it ready for open source. So if you start open source, if you decide to open source, do it early, and get a lot of companies involved, get a lot of feedback in, so you can make sure that you really develop a good product that doesn't just work for you. So the other thing that is super important about Admiral is that it was built to be robust. And by robust, I mean it's not something that we create and it should run for 2 years. No, this is something that is supposed to hold a lot of the data analysis, facilitate that sort of data analysis in the long run. So it should work for a long time. And one way we tried to ensure that was to have a permissive and jointly owned license between GSK and Roche. And that makes sure that, first of all, Admiral will not stop simply if one company does not want to do it anymore. There's still another company around. The monetization is much more difficult to achieve for a company, so it's much less likely that it will ever go closed source. And even if it goes closed source, the parts that have already been open sourced, they will stay open source, and there may be others taking over at that point. Another big thing with our packages, or packages in general, software in general, you have to maintain it. You cannot just write a package and expect it to be ever done, really. Like, you have to put efforts in it. And by having 2 companies and 2 company names attached to this Admiral project, really ensures that they feel the responsibility to not hand out a bad product and to make sure that it stays up to date. Of course, nowadays there's many more companies involved in Admiral, but that's just how it started. Now I want to talk a bit about the design. And the design of this can go in many different ways, right? But one thing I want to talk about is that we created one core package of Admiral, and then we created separate packages for different therapeutic areas. And these are different, separate developers team. And the idea behind it is that we have one core package, which covers the most basic functions, which holds all the common functions that other packages will also use. And then for very therapeutic area-specific applications, there are the therapeutic area-specific packages. And they also hold different templates in there, of course. Plus, there's also internal company packages, and that makes it really, I only know of Admiral Roche. Well, we have that, and that really makes sure that we can connect a really broad solution, the open source solution, to a very specific and Roche-specific pipeline itself. So that facilitates basically the bridges the gap between the open source space and the company space. And then we also have working groups. There's, for example, a pharmacokinetic working group which deals with that sort of questions and tries to give their inputs in a channeled form into the Admiral. And we also have the communications working group where I'm a part of. And we just recently launched a blog, and it's called the Pharmaverse blog. And it's not just about Admiral, but in general, we try to publicize about what we are doing, get the movement going, get people involved, and try to showcase really what we are building. And I think that's also something that gets sometimes a bit neglected, that to create a package that is open source is one thing, but to create a package that is adopted by the industry is quite another. And to do that, you need some publicity as well, and you need to keep a momentum going. And that's what we try to do with this blog. I'll show it to you later a little bit. So, but now we have like 3, 4, 5 packages, and we don't want them to feel like different packages. So we really tried hard to create a consistent interface and a consistent design, a consistent language across all these packages, because it should not feel difficult, or you should not feel like you have to learn a new thing when you switch from one package to another. And this is ensured via a developer's guide that we publish on the Admiral Dev website, where you can really read through our strategies in the package development process. And this developer's guide is actually super useful also for people developing other packages as well, because it really covers a lot of different aspects that you have to consider when you design a package. So I really recommend reading that. We also implemented some CI/CD checks, which is like using GitHub, where we make sure that certain, let's say, the style is adhered to. So there's a consistent style across all the packages, that you don't introduce spelling errors, or that you don't have dead links and stuff like that. So that's really basic workflow. We also ensure that we have an overlap between the developers of the core package and the developers of the therapeutic area packages. And that makes sure that we always have a sort of information flow between the packages. Because the danger is, of course, that people replicate functions in a TA package, in a therapeutic area package, that already exist in some sort of way in the Admiral package. If you're not aware of, this can happen really quickly, and we really want to avoid that, because then you have, again, duplicate efforts, and this extrapolates when you think about maintenance as well. And generally, our Admiral is designed for modularity, and it means you don't have to, if you want to create a specific data format, if you want to create a specific data frame, let's say ADSL, which is a very common Adam dataset, you would not call a function that's called create ADSL, but you would have a list of functions chained behind each other, sort of like a dplyr does. And then you have basically a long list of functions where you can easily adapt things that you don't like about it. And it sounds like a lot of work. You have to create the whole script, right? No, for that we have, of course, the templates for the most and more complex tasks. So you can already start with the almost finished product, and then you adjust where you need to. And it gives you a lot of flexibility in the way you work. And this is the PharmaVerse block. I cannot scroll here, but this is just to showcase what we have at the moment. We started really recently, I think a month ago, and we have like 4 or 5 blog posts, 6. And so this is all about the PharmaVerse, really, but because we are from the Admiral team, we really have mostly worked on Admiral. But if any one of you wants to create a blog post, get their name out, found something cool about the PharmaVerse that they want to showcase, please feel free to reach out, and we're very happy for any submissions. Let's talk about the development workflow. Of course, GitHub is the centerpiece of our work that we do, right? And every fix, everything we do really starts as an issue on GitHub. And then we have weekly stand-up meetings where we discuss which issues should be addressed, which are more important. We check in on progress. I think it's a pretty standard workflow that we use. We discuss priorities for the current release. And then, of course, we have a product lead from Roche, Eduardo Manzini, and the technical lead from GSK, which is Ben Straub. And of course, they are able to set specific priorities if they feel the need to do so. But overall, it's a very hierarchy-less sort of work. You can assign your own issues. If you're interested in doing a specific kind of work, you can just assign yourself to that. You can speak up, you can talk strategy. There's a lot of discussions going on also in the discussion section of the GitHub repository. And it makes you feel really involved in such a project. And then we have quarterly releases, so release 4 times a year. And yeah, that's our development workflow. Here's a picture of our project board. This is what we look at when we have these weekly meetings, where you just have the backlog, the priority list, the progress list, and in review, and then at the very right end, which is cut off, would be the done part. And in that way, we can always move from one to the other to the next. And then once everything's to the right, we're done, right? But of course, there's always issues added, so it's never really done. I think probably the most important part of my perspective as a newcomer is the impact it has. And first, to talk a bit about the impact it has on Roche, or on a company who is part of such a project, and then the impact on me as a worker here. So for Roche, of course, they get basically a discount on their developers. So we have a huge project, high quality code that we write. We have many developers, and Roche only pays for a fraction of that, because they hire only a certain amount of developers, and the rest is from different companies, right? So I mean, that's generally the case for cross-company collaborations. They get a seat at the table, so it's not their own only product, but they get a seat at the table, they can discuss, they can set priorities, and we do that, or they do that through us in a way. But they don't have total development control, because there's also other companies, right? So it's a bit of a balance, but overall I think it's a really good deal for the company as well, because they can still create their own Roche, Admiral Roche package, in which they have really total development control, and they can sort of bridge that gap, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, I think one huge impact of that switch to R and that switch to open source space is that it has a huge impact on their talent pool that they can attract. So for me, coming from university, this was a huge deal for me that actually such a big company is spending so much money on open source development. And not just that, but also a lot of people learn R at the moment. At universities, it's taught very, very much, and also Python and other languages, because they don't require a license, right? People can just teach it. People can learn it themselves even, and that really opens up people who are able to apply for such a position. And if I think back about probably 5 years ago, I would not have been able to apply for this position that I'm in now, because just R wasn't that common yet. I would probably not even have thought about applying. So for the workplace, I think a big impact for me was it broadened the definition of what is a statistical programmer. And they did that justice by calling it not anymore a statistical programmer at Roche, but analytical data scientist, to really capture the variety of work that you can do. And you can really choose what you want to do, which is fantastic. For example, I never thought data scientists would start writing blog posts and so on, and be involved in that sort of stuff. And that's kind of cool. I also think this is maybe more of a minor thing, but I realized that many statisticians at our place of work use mostly R, and statistical programmers mostly didn't. And I think it's good to have a shared language between the two positions. So I also really happy that open source, it's all about transparency. You can see what's happening, you can see what's the next release, what's planned, how far along is everyone. The community involvement is also a huge thing, right? So we have a lot of people who can just check out our GitHub repository. They can make their own sort of raise issues, discuss things, be part of the discussion, and really help develop this product. And that means a lot of transparency, right? And that's really cool. But it's also for, if you work on Admiral, you also get recognition for working on Admiral, because your name is out there, you're part of that project. And this is not just Roche internally, but everyone can see that you have worked on that project, which is a big part of the open source space in general, I guess. But I also think it's really useful. I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like if there's a mistake in an open source project, it's more quickly dealt with, and it's more openly dealt with, because it's just, there's no way to hide it, right? And yeah, there will be corrections, and that's a good thing. So further than that, I think that's a really cool part. If you learn Admiral in one company, and it's adopted across the industry, you can easily transfer your knowledge to another company. And that gives some sort of power back to workers. And I think that's really important. And that's just one small piece of that open source. There's also it's also a different kind of work if you work in a cross-company development team, because you don't have your manager in your same team. You're sort of independent of that. So you still have hierarchies in the sense of who is more experienced as a developer, who can help you more, but it's not a hierarchy as you have it in a company. So you don't have anyone really being able to tell you what to do in a sort of way. On the other hand, the flip side of that is, of course, your manager is not there. So you may not see exactly what you do unless they check the repo or they come to listen to your presentation. And of course, what I really enjoy about this work is that you can really, I mean, this goes together with the less hierarchies, right? So you can really choose yourself what you want to do and what you want to work at. And that's really pleasant to work in such a way. See how much minutes? Okay, a bit over. Of course, the other thing is very obvious. Like, you get to meet people from other companies, and that's not very, very often the case when you don't work in such a project. And that is not just good for you, but it's also good for your own company, because if you see certain ways of work that have been implemented in other companies, and you see how it's done, you can bring it over to your company. So this connection just basically helps everyone, I think. And of course, you also can have opportunities outside of your own company. For example, you can take on a leadership role in in such an open source project, which is not necessarily connected to any position that you have in your own company, but it's just you gain different experiences and you have different opportunities in such projects. So in conclusion, I think if open source and cross-industry collaborations, if they are done well, they are more efficient for everyone, for the worker, for the programmer, for the company as well. you get better results, you get them in a more streamlined way, and it really opens horizons. It breaks down the borders of companies, it breaks down the siloed solutions, and yeah, just opens up. And as I mentioned before, it expands the job description of a statistical programmer, which for me personally makes this a really nice place of work, and I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, that was my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Cool. Thanks very much, Stefan. And so I think time-wise, we're going a little bit okay again. So maybe we have time for 2 questions. So do we have a question from the audience?
Hi. Thanks for a really interesting presentation. Probably it will be a kind of off topic, but since you are like fresh in the industry, and for example, I'm quite new when I compare to my colleagues at the company that I work for, because I've been in like almost 6 years. So I'm pretty new when I compare to those who have been like in the big pharma for 20 years. So what interests me is like you are a newcomer, you're like a fresh blood. How do you think it, given the fact, you know, what you've learned so far, how do you envision everything will change like in 10 years? I know it's like a, you know, optimistic thing because how we see the technologies are evolving, they are doing it way faster than we expected. But what's your input on that with regards to, you know, implementing the open source and so on? Because I assume that it won't be only R, it will be R, Python, Julia. It's like we need to adapt to the stack that is suitable for job that we need to do, not to get like stuck to one stack, right? So what's your input on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I totally agree. I think the future is not R like specifically, but R will be, I think, in my opinion, a part of that future. And I think here we switch to a more language agnostic approach. And at the moment, R was just the most suitable tool for that job, right? But I can see the future that may change very well, yeah. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it brings me to another one.
Very good.
Unless someone wants to share the floor.
I think it looks good for you.
Okay.
Maybe you have to choose.
So I'll shoot. Because I saw there are really cool icons for those R libraries that you have created so far. Are you planning to commercialize it? Because I've been talking to my colleagues who are like software engineers from working for different industries and so on, and they told me, you know, it looks so good, and it's like it looks like they might want to commercialize it because you know of that. So
yeah. So at the moment, that's not at all planned, and all the developers hope it's not going to happen. So I don't think that's on the horizon anyway soon, as far as I know, at least. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cool. And maybe just to mention that last point, all of the Pharmaverse is under Apache 2.0 or MIT. So even if they do close source it, you could still just fork it and take it in a different direction. So we're into lunch now. So we will wrap up till 1 p.m. So thanks again, Stefan.
Thank you.